Russian serial rapist, pedophile and murderer Igor Irtyshov. The worst maniac in street. Petersburg was hunting schoolchildren. In the 90s, he terrified the townspeople. In less than a year he attacked 9 boys. The maniac was sentenced to death. However, in the end he escaped being shot. In modern Russia about people go missing every year, including children. They are not found. Listen to a documentary story about a street. Petersburg pervert to know the psychological portrait of a criminal. Perhaps someday it will help save someone's life. Igor Irtyshov was born on August 17, 1971 on the Krasny farm in the Krasnodar territory. The family was dysfunctional. Igor's parents suffered from chronic alcoholism. Irtyshov's mother drank even during pregnancy, and therefore the boy was born and grew up weak and sickly. The yard guys often mocked Irtyshov, and he cried and ran to complain about his mother's offenders. When Igor was about 7 years old, his father left the family, and 3 years later the boy got into an accident and received a head injury that affected his mental development. The doctor's diagnosis was disappointing: mental retardation in the degree of moderate ability. The way to an ordinary school for Irtyshov was closed. His mother sent him to a boarding school for mentally retarded and ceased to be interested in the fate of her son. In the boarding school, Igor suffered from beatings and bullying by his senior pupils. He could not give them back because of his slender physique, and the offenders began to get him drunk and, after another binge, raped him, further damaging the already unhealthy psyche of Irtyshov. After graduation, he entered a vocational school and studied to be a carpenter, but he did not work by profession for long. Igor managed to work as a milkman, janitor and cook, until dreams of a beautiful life brought him to Moscow. Irtyshov could not find a normal job in the capital, and therefore he was interrupted by odd jobs and often starved. Everything changed when, in the early 90s, Irtyshov met a homosexual who worked as a conductor. A new acquaintance invited Igor to move to him in St. Petersburg and helped him get a job as a dishwasher in the Pegasus cafe. But the relationship did not last long. After parting, Irtyshov moved to the village of Metalostroy near St. Petersburg. Sometime later, Igor climbed the career ladder, becoming a waiter. True, he had no friends among his colleagues. Everyone avoided the hysterical, vindictive, but at the same time extremely cowardly Irtyshov. He regularly rolled up scandals because of a careless word addressed to him or a sidelong glance. The Pegasus Cafe, where the brawler worked, was a favorite resting place for St. Petersburg homosexuals. Irtyshov often received offers from visitors to continue their acquaintance in a more intimate setting and for money. So he began to engage in prostitution. To attract customers, Irtyshov began to dress stylishly, bleached his hair and made a fashionable bob haircut. He hoped that women would appear among his clients, but they did not often pay attention to him. Mostly Igor's services were used by men prone to BDSM. Already during the investigation, he will claim that he has repeatedly become a victim of cruel torture by criminals and Caucasian clients. However, according to other sources, it was Irtyshov who tortured his clients in the role of an imperious master, moreover, to mutual pleasure. Be that as it may, prostitution brought him a good income, but over time, role-playing games ceased to satisfy the sadistic inclinations of the young man. In 1993, Irtyshov's attention began to be attracted by boys, extremely puny and weak, who could not give him back. Igor decided on the first crime in December 1993. One day, while walking in Pine Park, he noticed 3 schoolchildren, 10 and 11 years old. Together they went home from training. After observing the boys for a while, Irtyshov made sure that there were no adults nearby, took out a knife and went after the trio. Seeing a stranger with a knife, one of the schoolchildren rushed to run, and the 2 brothers became numb and obediently followed Irtyshov to a deserted place. Though the maniac gave them an incomprehensible liquid with a pungent taste and smell, raped them and disappeared. The seriously injured brothers were able to get home and told their parents about the attack. They immediately turned to the police, but the police were unable to detain the pedophile in hot pursuit. After the attack in Pine Park, Irtyshov hid for a month. During the day he worked as a waiter, and at night he served customers. But in February 1994, the maniac committed a new crime. That day Irtyshov had a day off, and he drank from the very morning. Getting drunk, he went for a walk around the village of Metalostroy and met a 9-year-old schoolboy who was walking home from school. Irtyshov followed the boy to the house on Sadovaya Street, where he lived, and slipped behind him into the entrance. They entered the elevator, and when the car stopped at the right floor, the maniac attacked. He pinched the student's nose and mouth, and then pulled him out onto the landing. The boy lost consciousness from suffocation, and Irtyshov raped him, and then strangled him. Later, the maniac admitted that he did not plan the murder, but did not control himself at all due to severe intoxication. In May 1994, another 9-year-old boy from St. Petersburg became the victim of a rapist. Irtyshov gained confidence in him and persuaded him to go up to the attic of one of the houses on Riga Avenue, supposedly to look at the nests of pigeons. Having lured the student into a trap, the maniac raped him and tore his crotch with his hands. The bleeding boy managed to get down from the attic. The residents of the house noticed him and called an ambulance. Doctors saved him, but the child was left disabled. The intervals between crimes were reduced. The next time the maniac attacked a month later. This time, his victims were 2 school children of 9 and 11 years old, who were walking on the banks of the Neva. Threatening with a knife, Irtyshov took the boys to a deserted place between the river pier and the Volodarsky Bridge and raped them there. St. Petersburg was seized by a real panic. The townspeople demanded that the police find the maniac as soon as possible and protect their children. But the problem was that the detectives had no idea who they were dealing with and in which direction to search. Since only boys were the victims of the attacks, the investigators suggested that it was necessary to look for the perpetrator among the St. Petersburg homosexuals, who were checked as soon as possible. But it was not possible to calculate Irtyshov. In the meantime, the police were looking for the maniac and appeared on TV with calls to be careful. The residents of St. Petersburg decided to act on their own. They asked for time off from work in order to see off and meet the children from school, and tried once again not to let them go outside. Irtyshov himself quickly realized that he was being hunted in the city, but that did not stop him. At the end of September 1994, near one of the houses on Bogatyrsky Avenue, the maniac noticed a 15-year-old teenager. He was returning from school and entered the entrance. Irtyshov went into the elevator together with the schoolboy and, as soon as the doors closed, attacked the victim. He hit the teen in the face, but he did not lose consciousness and fought back the attacker. While the fight was going on in the cab, the elevator doors opened, and the schoolboy, pushing Irtyshov away, ran screaming, and the alarmed residents of the building, hearing the noise, began to leave the apartments. The maniac got scared and fled through the back door. But this failure so excited Irtyshov that he immediately went to look for a new victim. An 8-year-old boy was noticed by a pedophile at a nearby entrance. He did not even think about the risk of being caught near the place where he had just attacked. The schoolboy rang the intercom, waited for his mother to open the door, and went into the entrance. The skinny stranger who slipped behind did not alert the child. As soon as the cabin moved up, Irtyshov pounced on his victim and began to choke. He drove to the 15th floor, dragged the half-dead schoolboy into the back room, raped and ripped his crotch. Not resting on this, the maniac tore out 9 meters of intestines from the child. Throwing the entrails at the trash can, Irtyshov took the school backpack from the crime scene and fled. After some time, the boy, disfigured by a pedophile, woke up and, despite the strongest shock, made it to his apartment on the 13th floor. The mother, distraught with horror, called an ambulance. Her son was taken to the clinic of the pediatric university. There, doctors fought for the life of a little patient for 6 hours and managed to stabilize his condition. Despite the terrible injury, the boy had a chance for salvation. He needed an artificial bowel transplant. Such an operation was possible only in the United States and cost a lot of money, but American specialists agreed to carry out the operation free of charge. Nevertheless, about $500,000 was required for flights, accommodation in the country, supplies, medicines and intravenous food. Thanks to caring people who learned about the tragedy, the money to save the victim of Irtyshov was collected in an almost incredible 10 days. After that, the boy, accompanied by his mother and grandmother, was taken to Pittsburgh. For his life, doctors fought for 6 years. The child went through about 30 stages of an artificial intestine transplant, but in 2000 he died before the next operation. At the site of the latest attack, investigators found Irtyshov's fingerprints. Dozens of possible witnesses were interviewed, among whom was a girl who saw a maniac that day. She said that the strange man smelled of the popular Black Dragon lotion in the mid-90s. A 15-year-old schoolboy, who managed to fight off Irtyshov, helped to draw up a detailed composite sketch. Soon the whole of Street Petersburg was pasted over with leaflets with a portrait of a maniac. This sketch was also printed in newspapers and began to be shown regularly on Central Television, where Irtyshov saw him. He realized that he would be caught from day to day, and therefore dyed his hair a different color and fled to Murmansk, where he settled with his friend. But he could not stand the neighborhood with Irtyshov and a month later kicked him out. The maniac suggested that in Street Petersburg the noise around his crimes had subsided and returned to the city. There he roamed the apartments of his lovers, who, in exchange for intimate services, fed Irtyshov and gave him pocket money. At some point, one of the homosexuals with whom Irtyshov lived noticed a bloody children's backpack at his guests, the same one that the maniac took from the scene of the last crime. It is completely incomprehensible why the killer carried such evidence with him, but the landlord suspected something was wrong and turned to the police. On November 28, 1994, 23-year-old Irtyshov was detained in a hostel of the Kirovsky plant, where he settled with another lover. During the search, the operatives found the maniac's clothes and shoes, on which traces of blood remained. For a long time the maniac did not confess his crimes, diligently pretending to be innocent. But then Irtyshov decided to change tactics, and began to feign insanity. Sobbing for her without reason, he convinced the investigators of his abnormality. After all, a normal person, according to him, simply could not commit such crimes. The maniac asked to be placed in a mental hospital for life and treated there. In the meantime, the detectives began confrontations. His juvenile victims were supposed to identify the culprit. But the children were speechless at the sight of their tormentor and rushed out the door. This behavior was recorded every time by witnesses. The victims of Irtyshov told their relatives who were waiting in the corridor about which of the men presented for identification was a pedophile. Parents were usually left outside the door, because as soon as the first identifications were carried out, it became clear that Irtyshov might not live to see the trial. Parents rushed at him like tigers, and the riot police could barely restrain them. What prompted him to such terrible crimes, Irtyshov could not really explain. He said that he just wanted to. When asked why he tore out the intestines, the pedophile answered, "They say it was just interesting." The maniac did not succeed in deceiving experienced psychiatrists. He was recognized as sane, and he lost his chances of getting for compulsory treatment. As noted by experts, if not for the detention, Irtyshov would have attacked the children further, and his crimes would have only become worse. There are a lot of scoundrels, but this Irtyshov is inveterate, finished, I would say, explained the retired police colonel. Since his cynicism and cruelty were outrageous, even in comparison with everyone else. Sooner or later, this man would come to understand that the victims should not be left alive. And we would have a whole chain of corpses. And then perhaps, the crimes would become even worse. Irtyshov, placed in the famous Street Petersburg prison, Kresty, waited a long time for his trial. They could not find a lawyer for the pedophile. All the lawyers, as one, refused to defend him. The operatives learned that the prisoners planned to arrange lynching against the maniac at the first opportunity, and therefore Irtyshov was placed in a double cell with a deserter soldier who ate his colleague during the escape. The pedophile himself, while in the cell, continued to imitate insanity and pelted the guards with his own feces. The hearings, which began in May 1996, were held behind closed doors, and the court's verdict, the death penalty, did not surprise anyone. But they did not have time to carry it out. While Irtyshov was throwing complaints at all possible instances, a moratorium on the death penalty was introduced in Russia. Therefore, the maniac went to serve a life sentence in the Mordovian correctional colony No. 1, Adinitka, known for its harsh conditions of detention. In the colony, a pedophile is in a cell with another killer. His cellmate, like the jailers, Irtyshov harasses inhuman squeals, hysterical laughter and endless antics. And sometimes he falls into apathy and sits motionless, staring at one point. The behavior of the prisoner has not changed for more than 20 years, so the leadership of the colony does not exclude that the pedophile has really gone crazy. When Irtyshov was detained, he was declared sane, but time passes, everything changes. Now sometimes you don't even understand what he is saying. I wrote one letter to Boris Yeltsin, another to Santa Claus. From this set of words, it is only clear, I want vitamins. In general, for people like Irtyshov, separate institutions are needed. What do you, viewers of our channel, think about this? Write in the comments. And also do not forget to share this video on your social networks, press the subscribe button and the bell for notifications about new films. Please switch to other videos that you currently see in the end screens.